Welcome everyone. It's really lovely to have you all here and to have everybody here in person. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, and that we thank the Coquitlam First Nation who continue to live on these lands and care for them along with the waters and all that is above and below, and that the Coquitlam Nation shares the land within the shared territories of Tsleil-Waututh, Keithley, Musqueam, Stolo, Squamish, and Coquitlam First Nation. So I'm Yonina Campbell, and I'm the Executive Director with the BC Green Party. And it's a great pleasure to be here tonight to talk about something really important that I think affects young people, people in their senior years, people trying to get into the housing market, as well as people who are either facing homelessness or homeless. I thought before we start, I would just read out a couple of things in terms of some feedback that our party's been receiving as we have been launching this housing campaign. And we've been working very closely with Sonia in the legislature, her and Adam, our other MLA, to really bring attention to the issues that are facing British Columbians. So I'm just going to read 3 so that I don't take too long up here. And this was direct feedback. So in terms of the types of feedback we are receiving, people are contacting us and saying they're facing evictions or rent evictions, the high cost of rent, they're being locked out of the housing market, or their children are, they're experiencing homelessness or know someone who has, they're looking at a housing shortage, affordable housing, and the wealth inequity and inflation, as well as unsafe housing, affordable housing conditions, high mortgage, property taxes, bad tenants unable to evict, and too many regulations for the landlord. And just to give you a little bit of an indication, here are some things that people have written in. My mom is in a rental house, and she has lived there for 10 years. The house is now for sale, and she is a senior. There's nothing in her budget, and she is on a fixed income. I've tried to get her into subsidized housing, and their list is so long that they aren't accepting new applications. I'm worried that she might actually go homeless. Here's another response that we've received. This is a little bit different. Someone trying to get into the housing market. I've been working full-time, renting for 20 years. I've worked as a middle-income earner, but had to pay off student loans. About 30% of my income each month for 11 years. I have a master's, funded by extra part-time work, and now I'm trying to save for a down payment. I've inherited a small amount of money, but I can't keep up with the prices of the homes. I'm being locked out. And the last one I'll share is somebody on disability. As an adult on social assistance, my daughter pays $800 for a bedroom in a house. She has $500 for food, supplements, clothes, storage payments, gifts, haircuts. Without a social worker, she cannot get proper medical care and continues to slip through the cracks. Even my MLA did not find a way to help that she can figure out. So she continues to live in poverty, and her condition continually gets worse. So, fortunately, we are here with some people who tonight are going to talk to us about their experiences, their expertise, and possibly some solutions to the things that people are facing in British Columbia. So I'm going to introduce our panel here tonight. I'll start with Joe Keithley, if you could just give a little wave.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Joe.
I feel like I want to start a little song with that.
That'd be easy to do.
That would be.
We've done many with our mayor.
That's true. Okay, you do not want me singing though. Joe is a Burnaby City Councillor. He is born and raised in Burnaby. He serves on council where he's dedicated to working for fairness and equity for all residents. In addition to his work with the council, he's chair of the city's Environment Committee and also represents the city on the board of directors of Econ and Metro Vancouver Regional District Water Committee. Affordable housing is one of Joe's top priorities. I'll go to John. Can you wave a little wave? John Kendler is the current chair of the New Westminster Greens Riding Association and served as campaign manager for Cyrus C in the 2020 provincial election. He holds a master's degree in public policy from Simon Fraser University and has worked in the recycling industry for the past 10 years. He's also spent most of his adult life in Strata condominium boards, and including the last 3 as president, and you're still standing, we'll say that, of a large strata in Westminster, giving him some unique insight into the housing issue from a strata standpoint. And lastly, but not least, we have Carol Ann Flanagan, a little wave. She is the executive director of the Society to End Homelessness in Burnaby. The Society's mission is to end homelessness in Burnaby, and it's committed to working with all levels of government, the health authorities, social services agencies, businesses, faith communities, and concerned citizens to ensure the provision of housing, support services, and adequate income for Burnaby residents who are without housing or at risk of homelessness in Burnaby. And then we have a wonderful moderator here with us tonight. Sonia is the BC Green Party's leader. She's MLA for Cowichan Valley. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate about Sonia and her leadership is that she really truly understands and champions the intersectionality of the crises that we're facing. Not just the climate crisis, our housing crisis, our affordability crisis, the opioid crisis, and that we really need to come together like you have here tonight. And I really am so grateful for that, because it's not a partisan issue. It's about coming together at all levels of government in all the ways that we can work together. And I know that's the style of leadership that Sonia wants to bring to this. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator, Sonia, who is going to moderate our panel tonight.
Thank you, Zonina, for the introduction and for the land acknowledgement. Thank you to all of you for joining us. This is wonderful to see you here in person and to be part of this conversation. And thank you, of course, to the 3 of you for being on the panel. And I think it's so important for us to be talking about the reality that we're facing here in BC, and not just in BC. This is a increasingly a global issue. Where we want to end is everybody has a place to live, and that they can live in dignity and security and in community. And so this is, where we want to get to. And I'm delighted to have this conversation with everybody tonight. So I'm going to start with you, Carol Ann. Kind of a two-pronged question. You've been the executive director of the Society to End Homelessness in Burnaby since 2016.
Yeah.
What do you see as the factors that are contributing to homelessness in Burnaby?
I know since pre-COVID, we run an outreach resource center, and our numbers have increased 150% of people who come to us every single week. So we're serving about 200 people. They come for medical care because we have a nurse practitioner. They come for the food bank, food hub that we supply. They come for clothing. They come for, we're still doing tax clinics, foot care, free Wi-Fi, because during our outreach we offer that. And within, I guess, the first 3 months of COVID, we had people, when we first offered free Wi-Fi, thanks to the Burnaby Public Library, there were guests who came to us and said, I haven't spoken or was in touch with any of my family back east for the last 3 months. They don't know if I'm dead or alive. I don't know if they're dead or alive. So it, because of the services, we were able to join families. A little bit, my story is I've always worked, usually in the nonprofit area. I lived on my own. I could afford it. One of the basement suites or ground level suites. The landlord lived above me, loved me, everything was great. And his daughter wanted to move back home. And it was a legit, it wasn't like eviction or whatever, but I got evicted. I looked for a place to live in Burnaby. And I looked, and unless I wanted to pay like 70% of my income, I couldn't even find a studio to live in. So I moved back for 2 years, back to my daughter's and my granddaughter's house. Slept on a hide-a-bed in the living room for 2 years. I finally found a place of my own, but I'm paying way more than 30% of my income. And I also noticed that since COVID, more people realize that they're so close to homelessness, because all of a sudden the job goes, rents, well, they weren't increased, but now you have to decide, am I going to pay rent or am I going to feed my kids, right? Am I going to take the medicine or am I going to pay rent? And so I know when we were doing the homeless count just before COVID struck, so March 3rd, that night to the 4th, Burnaby's homeless count went up 80%. And I actually went and checked my numbers today before I got here, because even though I know them by heart, I wanted to see them on paper. And so they, on the street, now this is a 24-hour picture, right? So there is Teresa here in the audience. We were actually co-chairs of the homeless count for Burnaby. 1 in 4 people did not want to get counted, even though they were homeless. They didn't want to be put in the system. They didn't want the stigma, even though we weren't asking their names. So we were able to register 19 homeless, people living on the street. The EWR was open that night. The extreme weather shelter was open, so that we were able to get 8 people there. In the shelter and warming centers themselves, there were 86 people. And at the time, the city had a warming center at the Bill Copeland Center, as well as our temporary shelter. And then we had 11 people that had no fixed address. So that could be people at the hospital that are homeless. So they were kind of sheltered, but they had nowhere, once they're released, they had nowhere to go. The temporary Burnaby shelter, pre-COVID, had space for 40 beds, right? They had 30 spots for men, 10 spots for women. The shelter was filled within 2 weeks, has always been filled since 2 weeks. Since then, COVID, they had to cut everything in half because you had to social distance. So where did those people go? The city doesn't have any warming centers anymore. And so, even though we are always advocating for it, so where do those 86 people that was average per night go? They're on the street. They're in the parks. They're in the forest. They're everywhere, but on a roof under their heads, over their heads. So, yeah. And the shelter is still full. There's an isolation unit. Now that the shelter only holds 40 beds, there is an isolation center that's in case somebody gets COVID from the homeless population. And it's truly a community because they take care of each other. And they come to us, and they are loving people.
Sonia, are you alluding to other stuff that we're doing too as well? Yeah, okay, so well, what we've done in the last 3 years, we've actually got, they're either built or on stream, is 2,000 units for people in need. You're talking disabled people, seniors, people without income or minimal income. So there's 2,000 units either built or being built. And it's our mind, in our mind, myself and the mayor, Mike Hurley, and we've got some help from some of the other councillors, that it is unaffordable to own a house, right? So the thing, and I don't think we can correct that, but the thing we can do as a city is foster rentals. And I think that's at this point that, where you said you couldn't find a place to rent. So right now, if you, an average price of a 1-bedroom rental in Burnaby, I think is $1,700, right? So, and a 2-bedroom is like 22, and a 3-bedroom is 25 to 3,200. So it's like, I believe we're unfortunately the third most expensive behind Toronto and Vancouver, right? So that's not a track record to be proud of, but it's something to do with the proximity of where we are right next to Vancouver, we are the hub, the flow through city for the whole area, right? So, and so as far as rentals go, so we thought, and we had, I won't spend like an hour on this, but we had Mayor's Task Force on Housing a year and a half ago, and we concluded there's a whole bunch of different things that we need to do was to supply. People always talk about that missing middle, right? Which is not there, so open up different types of housing. So we're talking about, so we put up, we have these 2,000 units, non-market units being built. There's also like 2,500 rental units, which are strata, which people could criticize, but there is a need for rentals in all forms. You just can't have rental, okay, everything's gonna be below the average rent. That's impossible unless we got like, I don't know, $100 million from the provincial government and half a billion from the federal government, which doesn't seem to be coming soon. The frustration on our part, we did put up recently, over the last year, 10 pieces of land, and they were like based on like a 99-year lease at $10 a year, so pretty minimal. So there's 10 different spots. We offered 7 to the provincial government through BC Housing, 3 to the federal government, and we also said we would service all the land, like bring the sewer and water there, build the sidewalks. We'd pay for all the permit fees and everything to get these things built, and then it was supposed to be, then it would get built by the federal or provincial government. So for a city of 250,000, Metro has told us that we need to be building 3,000 units a year, right? We're going to be 340,000 by 2040, so like in 19 years. So the uptake we got from the provincial government, we got 1 unit. The good thing about this one was that it's run by a First Nations society, so it has that orientation. But it was 121 units. So you put that against 3,000, that's not much. And right during the federal election, we got some federal money from the Federal Liberal Party, and that was for 22 units. So that's a total of 143 units. Let's say it's on the minimal side, right? So we're willing to we know we have to get people a house, but we're just having a hard time. It's like, to build the building, the capital cost is the big thing. And then, but the other thing we are doing, like really briefly, I don't just speed this up, is that we realized with the rentals that like 2 years ago, we changed the bylaws so that if you build a new building, multi-family building, 20% of that has to be rental. And if the developer, and they're talking like from 6 units up to 500, 700, whatever the place may be, right? That you could have more density as long as the site was big enough for that. If you provided low-cost housing, which is 20% below the average in Burnaby, right? So the developers would build the building, and then you have somebody like, say, Progressive Housing would run the building and administer it, right? So then we have created like a lot of rentals in Burnaby, but as I say, providing people with places that they can buy, I don't see that in the cards at this time. It's financially impossible.
And John, you have a scenario where people are housed but are feeling very much at risk of losing housing.
Yeah, if I could, I want to pick up on something that Joe was talking about, because I'm curious to hear what he thinks about this first. I want to kind of so I'm the Strata person talking here. I'm a late fill-in for a woman named Osfeld Algie. Some of you may have heard of. She's been a major advocate in Westminster for people living in condominiums. So she lives in the Key neighborhood, some might be familiar with, which has been hit extremely hard by the Strata insurance crisis, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And she's a person who is physically disabled and unable to work, so that has hit her extremely hard as well. And she's turned into a major advocate for that particular issue. So I encourage you to look her up, and I'll do the best I can to sort of speak in her stead. But I wanted to pick up on what Joe was talking about. There was a case over the last year in Westminster, which you may have heard about because it's right on the border. There was a proposed development on 6th Street and 8th Avenue.
Yeah.
Brought forward by an organization called the Aboriginal Land Trust. And so this was for housing development, non-market housing targeted towards the Indigenous and Swahili communities in Westminster. 96 units. It's located on a street that's directly across from the high school. It's a bus route, high traffic street. Just a couple of single family homes privately owned in that space. It's not low income rental by any means. And this issue basically dominated the civic discourse for people who pay attention to it in the US for the better part of the year. There were official groups that created on either sides of the issue. There was a literally citywide petition that one group put together against this proposal. There was full page ads in the newspaper, Facebook groups, Twitter wars, all of that type of stuff. Marathon meetings, 70 plus speakers, I think, when it finally went to public hearing. There's kind of good news and bad news for me when I was watching that sort of from afar. The bad news was I was looking at this and thinking, how is a 96 unit building, relatively innocuous in a high traffic area, dominated the civic discourse for this amount of time and consumed so much staff and politicians' time for something that should be so simple to get through. So that's kind of the bad news. The good news about that situation is it was unanimously approved and it will move forward. But looking at that situation makes me think, what if a city, if one building in a good sized, decent sized city of the West creates that much controversy, we are in trouble if we want to get some serious housing built below market for people in our community. So I don't know, I'm curious if you're aware of that or what you think about that.
Yeah, the mayor and I have gone around to a number of different places where there's been proposals for seniors housing, low-cost housing. We had one was I won't name the locations, but one was a 4 to 6 story townhouse that would have been like 300 units for below market, for people in need. And the people in the area, I think they produced a 500 person petition against this within a matter of like about 36 hours. And then the mayor and I and Sab Dollawell, who's the chair of Metro Van, went down there, and it was the reaction was withering, in the face of it. And I know, another examples in Vancouver, they tried to do some low cost housing there. I think Granville 54th, and the opposition was fierce. So this is a really hard thing to break. People here in our area are used to single family homes, and they're not. A lot of them are not ready for change, right? But the encouraging thing is though that you do run into a number, because of people want to, older people who are homeowners want to have their kids still live in their town, right, and not be far away. My daughter moved to Langley, so they're lucky enough to get a house. So it's not too far. It's like half-hour drive, 40-minute drive, depending on the traffic. But they used to be just down Westminster, so it was a 5-minute drive away from our house, right? So in any case, a lot of older people who are homeowners go we need some sort of infill type housing where you can build more on different, whether it's like a laneway house or like a 4-plex or a 6-plex into those neighborhoods to get more people staying in the neighborhood, keep more families together. For example, as well as house more people. But what you're saying with that development at 8th and 6th, that's unbelievable. One project would and I'm sure the mayor and his councillors got a full ear of it every single day. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
Can we ask questions or?
I want to pick up on this, NIMBYism, I guess is
that's
the term that often gets used on this. And trying to unravel what is the impulse. So I fear of change. Joe, you've talked about that. People don't want to move from being single family houses in the community. Racism, I expect, is part of it. Stigma associated with poverty. How do we navigate out of that? What is the communication failure? Because the cost of this to our communities is significant, right? The cost of people not having housing, the cost of our families not being able to live in the same cities, the cost of not being able to have workers be able to live near where they work. Like these costs are mounting: the mental health costs, the physical health costs, the infrastructure costs. How do we navigate out of this? I mean, I'm asking you like a very high level question here, but I'd be very interested in all of your thoughts on that.
I don't have the answers, but
Okay.
what I do know, you look at whether it's young people or whatever who are coming into the job market, who are taking the all of a sudden essential jobs, being paid minimum wage, and I'm pretty sure the living wage in Burnaby is $23 and something cents.
Yeah,
It's
around there.
it's in there.
Yeah.
So here you've got all these people who are basically essential workers. And if we didn't notice this during COVID, you know, those who we think, oh, the low-paying jobs, you know, the cash and the person who stocks the shelves and they're making minimum wage, how do they ever even get their own place? And what happens when they do need to get a place? They're going to move away, right? They're going to move further out. They're going to move to New West. And so yeah, there's no real answer. Speaking of the mayor, Mike has done more in 3 years than were done in the past 30 years, right? We didn't have shelters. We had no warming centers. There was no acknowledgement that there were poor people. Never mind homeless. Burnaby had no problems.
Well, the old mayor said that all the homeless people came from Westminster or Vancouver.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so kudos to Mike and the councillors who now have done a lot more. Of course, there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Yeah.
I went on the city's website today,
Okay.
again, looking to make sure I had my numbers correct. And last year, it was posted that Burnaby would need 8,080 rental units between 21 and 25.
Mm-hmm.
Then between 26 and 30, they would need another 6,940.
Yeah.
And between now and in 9 years from now, they would need 15,040 units of rental market. This is rental market. This is not homes. What do we do, right? Really, what do we do? And you're talking about stigma. There was a meeting not too long ago that I was part of, where people were saying, "Oh well, homeless people are in my backyard or in my back laneway. We don't want them there." But where do they go?
That's an interesting point because we got with the Douglas Road Shelter, which is right in the center of Burnaby. At first, we did get a lot of complaints from residents saying, "Oh, you know, the bike got ripped off my backyard, or I found a needle here." But Burnaby did send around a bunch of workers just to clean stuff up, and the complaints have actually died down, totally. Right, I haven't heard one in quite a while.
After the first couple of months, there was actually no the crime rate wherever there was a shelter did not go up. Okay, and it takes people's minds. We have to change people's minds, right? That not every person who is homeless is a drug addict. Not every person who is homeless is a thief, right? There are people in the shelter, at the Douglas shelter, who get up at 6 o'clock every morning and they go to work. They go to work, but they can't afford rent.
Hi, I'm Clark Campbell. I'm a Burnaby resident, and I really want to hear solutions.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're all here for.
Yeah.
So, 80% of every community in the GVRD is covered with single-family homes. Those homes have one person living in 6,000 square feet of property. 2 people, 3 people. Seldomly do you see the amount of people that are going to be required to hit the numbers that you just mentioned. And I have to say, it's depressing when you say 15,000 rental units, and we know that we're building 150 in a year. It becomes unattainable, and people just stop trying. It's time for the province to force every community in the GVRD to change their zoning. It's been done in New Zealand and made some new that it is a solution because people are strangers until you know them. If you allow people to build density and give them the same opportunity that you're offering developers. So give them an incentive to build a basement suite that is suitable for wheelchairs and accessible for anybody, and then operate some type of a progressive community format that actually takes care of renting those places out and collect the rent for them. Make it easy to build a home in any place in British Columbia now is $350 to $400 per square foot. That's not real estate. It doesn't matter, Joe, if you're building that for homeless or soon to be homeless or what we get. It's expensive. The affordable part is an oxymoron. It doesn't work. But we can still make it happen. There's smart people that can help. And we need to help ordinary residents come to that realization sooner rather than later. If people choose not to participate, so they've got, I don't want this in my backyard, it shouldn't be an option. It should only be an option on their property. Let them keep their property and live it by themselves. But they are going to have to pay for that privilege. They should be de-incentivized. They should be charged to stay in the past. And everyone that wants to live in the future should be given an incentive. It should be something to keep people in a community. Everyone enjoys living.
Mike, so I counter a couple points there, and you bring us very pertinent points that the land is underutilized. That's the basic argument, like way underutilized. Yeah, there's no argument about that. I did have a discussion with your mayor, Mayor Cote, about this about a year ago, because I talked to him about, like, what about this densification? And I said, he said they had pursued this in Westminster, and he said, I was expecting that we got resistance everywhere, but he did get some buy-in. It depends. So it's a bit of an education process, right? In the sense too, it's also you got to be careful with where you're going with this, because in one sense, you ask people to pay for their house, pay taxes all their life, and you get somebody who's a senior citizen, has a limited amount of income, then you're saying to them, your home is worth this much at this point, but you have to pay this extra tax. That is a really hard thing to do.
No, it's not. It's not a hard thing to do.
It's not.
The property has value.
You
It
sure
just
said
gets attached
for
to
the
their
people that
taxes.
spent
And they
40, 50 years, sorry, 1 second, I'll let you talk in
Yeah.
a sec, spent 40, 50 years working, paying taxes, raising kids, being good citizens. All of a sudden, when they don't have an income anymore, like we're the only senior citizens, then you say to them, okay, that investment that you have is gone. There has to be a friendlier way to do that,
It's a
as
dating app
opposed
for
to just a
seniors,
blanket
and
rule.
they share those spaces. All I'm saying is utilize the space. They're lonely. They're in the heat dome. They're dying because they've got no one to take care of them.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Educate
Fair
them
enough.
to do things together.
Okay, sort of a bit of a rant there.
I'm
What about
sorry,
the next
I
person?
apologize.
If they own their homes like a lot of them do, it's not a cash flow issue because they can divert their taxes. Anybody over 55 can defer their taxes.
Yeah.
So it's not a cash flow issue. And you think about seniors who maybe bought a home for $100,000, now it's worth like 1.5 million. They might have no cash flow, but it doesn't matter because they just defer the taxes anyway. So
Well, Sonia, perhaps you could answer this one. I'd like to see the appetite of a provincial government that would come in with that rule.
The passion that we feel and the urgency that we feel is absolutely reasonable, right? And when you put it to me, okay, where would we get the appetite for these kinds of significant change? I'm going to probably steal that. People are strangers until you know them. I think that's a lovely way of seeing the world. Like so many issues that we face, the political will and the courage to make the decisions that we know need to be made has to be achieved by creating consensus at a political level. And, Caroline, you talk about how Mike and the council and Joe has done more in 3 years. Joe, I would say that the relationships between you and the mayor and the council have been significant for that. You have operated as a collective unit to say, we see this problem and we're going to take big steps. And of course the steps are going to need to be bigger. And that's where the province and the federal government come into play. The problem we have at provincial and federal levels, and we have seen it play out very much in the last 22 months, is that we have political parties that are putting their own interests ahead of this work that needs to be done. And it's absolutely one of my missions to create the consensus that we need to take big steps, because you can't put it all onto cities. You can't put it all onto municipalities. It is something that has to be done collectively and with a recognition that these are urgent and pressing issues that require different thinking, different solutions. And to get there, we can't be combating each other at a political level. We have to, it's almost like there is an emergency level of issues, and that list is growing by the day almost. You know, climate, the drug overdose crisis, housing and homelessness, inequality. And we almost have to put those into a separate political category and say, where we've been politically does not serve us in this time that we're in. We can't approach this with the same approach we've done. And we can see that election over election. We're going to create affordability. We're going to solve homelessness. And year over year, things are getting worse. So I think we need to achieve the kind of paradigm shift you're talking about. Doug? Clark? This is you've just realized what my greatest weakness as a politician is. Clark, we need a paradigm shift in politics. And it's happening in some places, and it needs to happen more urgently in others. John?
Listening to this conversation, it underpins so much of it. And this is the issue I've been passionate about for the last 20 years of voter turnout. If more people voted, so much of these problems that we were talking about would be solved. I brought a couple of numbers. So the voter turnout in my hometown of Westminster in 2018 was 27.5%.
Is that for municipal?
That was at the municipal level. Sorry, Burnaby was 32, Poco 28, Port Coquitlam 37%. Was the high.
The 32%, I think, was a 30-year high because of the conflict between the new mayor and the old mayor.
Yeah.
And
So
that's probably all homeowners only.
exactly. And so when you look at this tiny slice of populace, Joe knows, and everyone who's elected, everyone who wants to be elected knows, generally speaking, who makes up that 27.5%. It's property owning folks, more established in older, higher income, English as a first language, and so on and so forth. And so when we had the situations like I was talking about with the Aboriginal Land Trust proposal and the other stuff that Joe was talking about, when all of those angry people end up in the faces of our politicians, those politicians know that those are the people that elected them and could kick them out. If voter turnout, particularly at the municipal level, but also at the provincial level as well, went up even by 5, 10 points, the difference that would make and the amount that would empower and embolden people like Joe to make the decisions that need to be made that we're talking about here would be absolutely cataclysmic. So,
just
tell somebody, next municipal election, tell one person to vote.
Just to add to that, because there's always a thing.
Hold on, John.
I just want to quickly on top of what you were just saying. Australia, I believe, mandates that people
I
vote.
was just going to say that. Yeah,
Can we not go that direction?
I think we should.
Like you're at the municipal level, you're at the provincial level. What is the appetite for mandatory voting at those levels? Because really it's essential, as you can see. It's ridiculous we don't have it. We have census that's mandatory. Also, we don't allow permanent residents to vote. I think those are problems because they're taxpayers. So there's some problems there with our structure if we want true democracy.
You'll learn another thing about me. I am a democracy nerd. I think we need significant reform of our political system, our democratic system, and our governing systems. Back to what I was saying before, but again, to achieve that, what we need is, and Adam and I are pushing for this on so many fronts in the legislature right now, you put an all-party committee together, and then that committee comes forward and says, we've come to a consensus, what we need to improve our voter turnout, to improve our democracy and our outcomes is, mandatory voting, as they have in Australia. And then you suddenly depoliticize that decision. It's come from all three parties, right? To achieve that, you need the governing party to be willing to operate in that way. And we can get there. We are all grown-ups. We've all come into this realm because we want to serve. But again, we need help, right? We need that push externally to say, here's our expectations of you. You're elected to office. Our expectations are very high, and we want to see you working together. Right? But help us. I'm going to go back to Joe. You were going to answer something.
Like every political party, Sonia, you know this, everybody who's even thought about running politics, everybody says, if we could just get the young people who vote for us, we'd win. I've said that 100 times myself. If they had to vote, all the young people would be voting. And they'd actually be out there standing up for themselves and getting stuff like, what you're talking about there, Clark, the demand would be so high that the politicians go like,
First, as soon as they're eligible to vote, I ride my child's lacrosse team.
You know how we get young people to vote is we lower the voting age to 16.
That's
And so the first time they vote, they're doing it as part of their curriculum, and they're learning to become an informed voter, right? And so that every child, before they've graduated from high school, has voted. And what we know from data is that the first time you vote means that that's when you become a lifetime voter, right? And so if we miss that window, why are we missing that? Why do we think that we would want to miss that window for both education and participation as a citizen of your democracy? So this is, so much sense.
So, two things I'd like to hear a response from. If you put these two things together, what do you think would happen? You legislate that any and all homes can have secondary suites, and you institute universal basic income. What would happen?
yeah, well, the secondary suites, that's a really important thing. We have difficulties in the city. It's coming forward. It's supposed to be November. It's November now, so I'm theoretically planning to bring that to us, right? So I think that's a great way to open it up, right? That and there you have to get the residents to buy into, because generally with basement suites, the number one complaint is I can't park in front of my house. I hear that one constantly, right? The parking wars, right?
Well, you just have to empty people's garages of all the crap they've got.
With their
You had to have crap in your garage and everything.
ATVs and this. And what was the second part?
Universal basic income.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
people
Well,
can
no.
afford it.
That is something. That kind of ties into what Caroline's been talking about too. I think that when you have people that are homeless and the government, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, chooses to ignore them, the social services, like an amount of money that you use up per person, is about like an average like $60,000.
Yeah.
But if the government chose to support them, it'd be like more like 35 or 40 grand. So the government would have like a net saving if they got behind it. Like, okay, everybody needs an income, and it just makes financial sense. You'd be saving $20,000 a head by giving them proper services, getting them off the street. Which when you live under a bridge or like in a bush in a tent, it's not good for your health. So you end up in the hospital more, right? So.
LA, I think I'm looking at Federico to confirm, but LA has announced that it's going to introduce a basic income.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the benefit of this is to watch in real time, right? But also the basic income panel, the expert panel, the report that came out last year. I know that it was sort of presented as like, oh, they were against basic income, but in fact, several of their recommendations were about basic income. And I think that we have an evidence-informed approach that we can take very big steps in British Columbia, according to what the expert panel delivered in that report. And I think, you know, Joe, as you're pointing out, the social services, the cost of the punitive and stigmatizing approach that we take to poverty is not going to solve the issue. It's not. And this is the unfortunate reality about a lot of the programs that are in place from government, is they are punitive and stigmatizing, and they strip people of dignity. And we should not accept that as a society, because they're not going to be strangers if we get to know them. I'm going to turn to you, John, to tell us a little bit about what's facing Strata members, and particularly with insurance, and the risk that this poses for people, you know, as Caroline said, looking at homelessness in the future.
The Strata situation with insurance in particular is a big problem. However, I just want to make sure that everyone knows I'm not putting it. People who are experiencing this problem own an extremely valuable asset. There's no getting around that. They're not homeless and not facing a precarious rental situation. So when we talk about this, it's important to understand that context. I'm not trying to win the sob story competition here, right? That's not the idea. So just curious, raise hands. How many people here live in a Strata condominium? Okay, so there's a couple.
And I'm a president of mine.
Okay, there you go. Okay, so yeah, so I'll tell you the personal story with my building. So I live in New West, on the west side of town, 12th Street, sort of more of the blue collar area of town. I've been there for the last 5 years, and we were hit very hard by the insurance crisis. So what happened with us? We were going for a renewal of our insurance. We received our renewal proposal around 12:30 in the afternoon. I think it was March 30th, when our renewal term was the next day, April 1st. So we had no choice but to take what they gave us. We saw an increase in our premium from about $55,000 a year to $130,000. And our deductible went from, I think it was $20,000 to $75,000. And that was low. A lot of people were getting hit with $100,000, $150,000 deductibles. So what you end up with in that kind of situation is you don't really have insurance on your home. Basically, if the whole thing's burns down, you're insured. Or if there's an earthquake, you're insured. That's pretty much it. That's all you're paying for. And then but the reason you have to get it is because nobody can buy or sell or refinance a piece of real estate unless it's insured. So that was that. When you're hit with those types of increases, obviously that has a huge impact on people. In our building, we have done the best that we could to manage our budget to temper the impacts on people by making smart decisions and trying to run the building more efficiently in other ways. But there are a lot of people who have been hit with just disastrous amounts of increases. So I mentioned the Westminster neighborhood. There are stories coming out of there where people were hit with $300 to $400 per month increases in their Strata fees just to pay for the insurance. And again, this is insurance which is barely even covering their units anymore. So for a lot of folks, like someone in my position, again, having a valuable asset, there is some fluidity. You know, I'm not complaining. I have a valuable place to live, and I can sell it, and I could maybe move to Mission or something like that. But the people that it's hit the hardest are seniors, and that's very acute in New West, and particularly again in the Key neighborhood because they got hit so hard there. I think it has things to do with the insurers don't like the buildings beside the river, as well as the age of them and other factors like that. So that community was largely established in the early 1990s, and so a huge portion of the people that live there are seniors. And you have to think about a situation where you have a senior who's lived in a place for 20 to 30 years. They're completely established there. Uprooting and selling is just not an option, going through the stresses of those types of things. And now they're hit with a situation where they have a $300 to $400 a month increase in a fee that they cannot defer. So that's the gist of it, sort of, at least in my experience of what this sector is facing. So it's not insignificant. 30% of British Columbia, is about 1.5 million people out of our 5 million population live in some kind of Strata condominium, and that's only going to grow. So what we need to think about are some of the solutions to this issue, and there's a couple, and one of them people don't often think about. So I'm a big Green Party person, obviously. And a lot of people don't recognize the impact of climate change on this specific issue. So climate change-induced natural disasters have been a major driving factor behind the increases that we've seen. And a lot of people don't realize that. So when you have a situation like we had in June, where an entire city, town burns to the ground in Lytton, or a number of years ago when you have a large chunk of Fort McMurray that burns to the ground, these corporations, of which there's a very small number, it's literally like a dozen underwriters, I've learned all about all these things through this experience. The underwriters who are paying for someone's burnt down house in Fort McMurray or Lytton are the exact same ones that are underwriting your unit in Westminster Key. And you in the Key are paying for all the burnt down houses in Lytton and Fort McMurray. And so we need to address climate change. And this is an example of an issue of a way. I think that we need to talk about this more, because there's a lot of folks in this room who understand the existential threat of climate change. And we vote for strong environmental policies because we know that the human race is literally at risk. But there's a lot of people for whom that doesn't necessarily appeal, at least not in an immediate kind of way. However, a $300 to $400 increase in your monthly fees right here, right now, will appeal to a whole other framework of people. So I think we need to be talking a fair bit more about that. So,
Let's put two things together again. So, part of solving British Columbia's carbon footprint would be to shut down the gas export thing and free up all the work camps that are out there. Anybody ever seen a work camp?
Very nice.
They are huge. They are lovely. It's kind of like, how would I say it, expensive SROs. And, they come with rooms and restaurants and gyms and everything else. And just for example, before this Coquitlam Center was built over here, that whole area was a mobile park, mobile home park. People happily living there in prefabricated homes. There's, I think, between 6,000 and 8,000 units up north right now. If you've ever driven up there and seen them, they take up entire subdivisions of these 3-story conglomerates of buildings. And it is cheap housing, it's good housing. But I understand from what I hear from you, Joe, is that no neighborhood would ever want to have something like that in it, but it could be trucked in 3 months and set up. So it's an attitude issue.
It certainly is. I think that you have to find a way to put like infill housing like everywhere.
That's infill
Right.
housing, that's perfect.
Yeah, so I mean, if it's going to be like something quick, like modular housing, like I said, there's the women's shelter on Norland. There's 52 units there. There's another one, going to be 46 units. That's modular housing. It went up quick.
They're blocks.
It was held up by a year and a half. That's a good point. I was going to just comment on the Strata thing. The real will of Sonia mentioned like political will. If you thought, well, that many people were Strata owners, and if the government in charge wanted to win all of them over, why not nationalize the insurance business?
Yeah, ICBC
And then we could provide fair. And it's been done before with other industries. I mean, you had a right-wing premier, W.C. Bennett, nationalized the ferries, right, and built a ferry system, right. So this type of approach where people are being absolutely crunched. Yeah, they're not cognizant of climate change, or it's like, in the back of their ear, but it's not like in the forefront. But that financial bill, like you say, seniors, an extra $400 a month, that's like devastating, right?
I just wanted to comment on the NIMBYism. I've experienced a lot of that. I used to live in Nanaimo, and the problem, the NIMBYism comes from poor design in this low-cost housing and stuff like this. It's to do with the design, and what they need, if you want to get acceptance from the community, is you need a clean front design. No balconies, no external doors. And if you do something that's a clean front design, it's attractive, and people got nothing to complain about. And yeah,
Have you actually seen the transitional housing on Norland?
no,
They're really pretty.
well,
If you look at them.
but that's the only thing I can think of about the NIMBYism. That's the only thing I've looked, because I'm just saying, living in Nanaimo and seeing what happened, you know, and I'm thinking if they designed it differently, there would be no complaints. So, yeah, that's all. It's to me,
That's
it
a
works
good
even to
point.
design.
People here alluded to that the bigger barrier is like they don't want poor people in the neighborhood, and maybe can be racism involved too, right?
Oh,
So
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Okay,
No, that's
I
kind
didn't
of
know
like
that. I thought it was just the design of them that people.
the amount of people I talk to in the neighborhood, so we want to put something in there, and they go, you know, Joe, that's a great idea, but just this is not the right area for that.
Oh, okay.
I've heard that. I've only been elected for 3 years, right? I've heard it 100 times.
And I think until with what you were saying earlier, I think once people live beside someone who is low income but they're living in the same kind of building, when they get to know them, a little bit of that stigmatism or stigma goes away. And yeah, sorry.
Marina,
I just wanted to share a little bit about my story. I live in Burnaby and I rent in Burnaby. I've run 3 times. I ran in the last by-election that we had in Burnaby. And I agree with the voter turnout also. We had about 6% in the by-election. I've been running and I've been the only person who ran on the fact that I'm a renter in Burnaby. I'm also a single mom. I pay about 60% of my income towards rent. Last whole year I was unemployed, coming back to universal basic income. Had it not been served, I would have ended up on the streets with 2 kids. I have an MBA from University of Illinois, so it's not like I'm a low income person. Like, I don't fall into that category. But yes, based on like, you know, the COVID situation and stuff, yes, I could have easily ended up homeless last year had it not been for CERB. And affordability, I mean, I cannot afford anything in BC, let alone Burnaby or Vancouver. The only reason that I choose to live where I live is because I have 2 really young kids, and it is out of convenience that I am paying that much rent. Because if I move anywhere out in Langley or anywhere else, it will be very hard as a single parent to manage that. So I just wanted to share that with you. And yes, there are solutions. And the reason that I have been so involved with the Burnaby Greens and the BC Greens is to work with the government to find the solution and really push, because this is my everyday struggle. And I know there are a lot of single moms out there that I'm part of the single moms group on Facebook, and I keep hearing these things, and I know there are moms out there who are in worse situation than I am. They're minimum wage, at least, you know. When I do make money, I'm not making minimum wage, but still I'm not low income, but, you know, and I don't see my kids also ever having that stability of having a, you know, home of themselves. So it goes far more deeper than just, you know, just talk about the homeless. There are people like me who can end up on the street. And I don't fit into that category of, you know, poverty and stuff. So it's a far bigger issue that impacts, you know, a lot more people that the government is looking at. So I think the solutions have to cater for all of us and to find something, some kind of middle ground. I mean, even if I don't own something, for 3 years I lived in a 1-bedroom with 2 kids, just because I couldn't own anything else. So there's a lot of people who are in far worse conditions who are moms and who are trying to make it work, like me. And I just wanted to share that and just bring that to the record that, you know, let's not forget those people also.
and I think it's such a critical place, and we are wrapping up. I'm getting all the signals here, but what this speaks to is what we are all collectively losing when people don't have basic needs met, and we are losing the potential and the capacity and the contribution of all these strangers that we don't know yet. And that is nourishment of our whole society. And I want us to imagine if all of the people who are struggling just to make it, just to cover their rent, just to get from month to month, could be instead putting their energies into community building and solution making and contributions and volunteering, how much truly richer, and richer in the sense that really matters, we would all be. And I want us to really, I really thank you for sharing this, because it is the piece that I think we forget about the human dimension and that loss. I benefited over and over in my life living in subsidized housing as a child with my single mom, raising 3 of us, benefiting from tuition fees, benefiting from child care support so that I could go to school and finish my degree when I was a single mom, so that I could contribute. And this is what we are losing in such enormous volume right now, is this contribution of people in our neighborhoods, our communities, our cities. So thank you all. Thank you, Joe and John and Carol Ann, for your very valuable insights. And I know that these events don't come together without a lot of work behind the scenes. And Stephanie and Federico, thanks for sticking with me all day long. And I'm really glad we had this starting point of a conversation. And I think it's we have ways to go, but we can recognize some of the steps that we need to take to start getting us to the place we know we have to